What if the most valuable person in a billion-dollar company wasn't the CEO, but the janitor cleaning her floors? When a team of 20 experts failed to fix their broken AI, the one man with the answer was the person they were all trained to ignore. His quiet act of genius would change all their lives forever. What if the quietest person in a room held the key to a billion-dollar problem? What if the answers we seek aren't found in the noise of ambition, but in the stillness that follows? This is a story of two worlds moving on parallel tracks in a city of glass and steel destined to collide. One world was measured in stock prices and market share, the other in the soft sleeping breath of a child. And this is the story of what happened when they met. Her name was Sloan Mercer, and she was the architect of a silent, gleaming empire. From her office on the 90th floor of Mercer Dynamics, the city below looked like a circuit board, a predictable pattern of light and energy that she commanded. Her world was one of cold marble of conversations conducted like surgical procedures, and of a loneliness so profound it had its own gravitational pull. She had inherited the company from a father who taught her that love was a liability and success the only valid currency. She took his cold logic and forged it into a fortress, becoming a titan in the world of artificial intelligence. Her name was a brand, her face a mask of composed, untouchable power. She had everything she was ever told to want, and in the sterile sanctuary of her penthouse, she had nothing that mattered. Her life was a vast, polished, empty space. His name was Gavin Brooks, and he was a curator of that same empty space. After the last executive had gone, after the hum of commerce faded to the whisper of servers, his work began. He was a night janitor, a widower, a man who moved through the sleeping tower like a ghost. His world was measured in the rhythmic swish of a mop against floors that reflected a life he never saw, and in the quiet warmth of his 6-year-old daughter, Lena, tucked safely in her bed. Years ago, Gavin had stood on the cusp of a different life at MIT, his mind alight with the infinite possibilities of machine learning. But fate, in its cruel wisdom, had a different plan. When he lost his wife, he traded the complexities of neural networks for the simple grounding reality of being present. He chose his daughter. Now his greatest work was not code, but the crayon drawings Lena taped to their refrigerator. His life was small, contained, and more whole than Sloan Mercer's could ever be. He possessed a quiet dignity that no corner office could confer. These two people, the CEO and the janitor, were the north and south poles of the same building. She saw the world from a place of infinite altitude. He saw it from the ground up, noticing the scuff marks no one else saw, cleaning the messes no one else acknowledged. He found meaning in imperfection. She sought to eliminate it. They were separated by 1,000 panes of glass and a lifetime of choices. But in the heart of Mercer Dynamics, a system designed for flawless logic was about to break. A storm was gathering within the circuits of Project Chimera, Sloan's magnum opus. A single glitch, a tiny error in a line of code, was about to become the catalyst that would shatter one world, and in doing so, create a new one for them both. Because sometimes the person who fixes what is broken is the one no one ever thought to see. The boardroom on the 90th floor was a cathedral built to the god of progress. Its altar was a single 30-foot slab of obsidian that reflected the anxious faces of 20 of the most brilliant minds in artificial intelligence. At the head of this table, enthroned in steel and leather, sat Sloan Mercer. Her posture was a study in control, her expression as polished and unreadable as the floor-to-ceiling glass that encased them. The air was thick with the scent of fear and expensive coffee, a perfume of impending failure. On the immense screen that dominated the far wall, Project Chimera, her $2 billion dream had just died. What was once a swirling, beautiful nebula of data, an AI designed to create, to innovate, to dream up futures humanity hadn't yet conceived, had collapsed. It was now a static-filled screen, a digital gravestone. Project Chimera was supposed to be her legacy, the proof that she had surpassed her father. Now it was a public execution of her ambition. Report. Sloane's voice was quiet, yet it cut through the room like a shard of ice. It was not a question. It was a command for a sacrifice. Daniel Pierce, her COO, a man whose ambition was as sharp and tailored as his Italian suit, rose to his feet. He was a master of corporate language, a dialect designed to sound intelligent while saying nothing. We're experiencing a catastrophic mode collapse, Sloane. The generative model is caught in a recursive feedback loop. It's overfitting on a narrow subset of its training data and spitting out garbage. His words were a technical eulogy for their failure. They had thrown everything at it for 3 days. More data, different algorithms, brute computational force. It was like trying to repair a Swiss watch with a sledgehammer. Each attempt only shattered it further. It's the loss function. A young, brilliant engineer named Kenji stammered, his voice trembling under the weight of Sloane's gaze. There's a fundamental flaw in how it's calculating the divergence. It's broken. We'd have to rebuild the core architecture from the ground up. It could take 6 months. 6 months. The words echoed in the sterile silence. In the world of tech, 6 months was an eternity. It meant their lead client, a global automotive conglomerate waiting on a proof of concept, would walk. It meant $2 billion would evaporate into thin air. It meant Sloane Mercer, the iron-willed queen of AI, had failed. Her father's voice, cold and sharp as ever, whispered in her memory. Sentiment is a flaw in the system, Sloane. Fix the flaw or be replaced. She had built her life on that creed. She had walled off her heart piece by piece until this company was all that was left, her fortress, and now its walls were crumbling from within. No, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, a register her team knew to fear more than any shout. We are not going back. We are not failing. She stood, her presence seeming to suck the very air from the room. I don't care how. I want a solution on my desk by morning. No one leaves this floor until it's done. She turned, her heels clicking a sharp final rhythm on the marble floor. She walked out without a backward glance, leaving behind a room full of geniuses who had run out of answers, a broken AI that had forgotten how to create, and the crushing weight of her impossible demand. At 2:17 a.m., the boardroom was a tomb. The geniuses had long since surrendered, leaving behind a battlefield of empty coffee cups, discarded printouts, and the ghost of Project Chimera flickering on the screen. The only sound was the low hum of the servers and the gentle rhythmic swish of a mop against polished marble. This was Gavin Brooks's domain, now a space he restored to order, wiping away the day's chaos to make room for the quiet potential of the next. It was a meditative act, a routine that calmed the lingering static in his own mind. He rarely paid attention to the corporate debris left in the wake of such meetings, but tonight his eyes were drawn to the massive whiteboard that ran the length of one wall. It was a frantic tapestry of complex equations, diagrams, and angry scribbles, a visual record of a brilliant team's descent into panic. He could see their logic trace their flawed assumptions and pinpoint their dead ends. He saw the problem they were trying to solve, but more importantly, he saw the problem they were creating. He set down his mop, his worn work boots making no sound on the plush carpet. His gaze locked onto the central equation, the one Kenji had identified as the core issue, the loss function. They were using a standard Jensen-Shannon divergence model, a textbook approach for measuring the distance between two probability distributions. It was powerful, elegant, and in this specific context, utterly wrong. Gavin could see it with a clarity that felt like a physical sensation. Their model was too rigid, too punitive. It was punishing the AI for exploring novel outlier solutions, forcing it back into a safe, narrow channel until it collapsed under the pressure of its own limitations. They weren't just overfitting. They were mathematically strangling the machine's capacity for imagination. They were trying to force a wild creative system to behave like a predictable linear one. An old instinct long buried under the weight of grief and responsibility flickered to life inside him. The thrill of the puzzle, the deep, satisfying itch to fix what was broken. It was the feeling he had lived for at MIT, the feeling he had sacrificed to be a father. He glanced at the door, then back at the board. No one would ever know. It would be a whisper in the dark. He couldn't stop himself. He picked up a blue dry erase marker from the tray. His hand, so accustomed to the weight of a mop handle, felt the familiar, almost electric lightness of the marker. He didn't erase their work. Instead, in a clean, empty space at the bottom of the board, he began to write. He didn't sketch out code. He wrote the pure, elegant math that must precede it. He outlined a modified Wasserstein distance formula, an alternative that measured not just the difference between data sets, but the work required to transform one into the other. It was a gentler, more flexible approach, less a rigid ruler, and more a guiding hand. It would allow the model to explore without falling apart. It was like teaching a child to color outside the lines without tearing the page. Beside the beautiful string of symbols, he wrote a single simple sentence. He wasn't thinking as a janitor or as a former prodigy. He was thinking as a father, trying to explain a complex truth to his daughter. If the tub is clogged, you don't pour in more hot water. You unclog the drain first. He capped the marker, placed it neatly back in the tray, and took one last look. It was a quiet act of creation in a room dedicated to loud, expensive failures. He picked up his mop, finished his duties, and vanished back into the silent, sleeping corridors of the tower, leaving behind nothing but a clean floor and a small revolutionary idea. Sloane Mercer did not sleep. She paced her penthouse, the city lights sprawling below, like a galaxy she owned but could not touch. Failure was not a variable she tolerated. At 4:00 a.m., haunted by the silence of her own success, she returned to the office. She walked into the boardroom expecting to find a monument to her defeat, but the air felt different, calmer. And then she saw it. Tucked away in the bottom right corner of the chaotic whiteboard, a small island of perfect clarity in a sea of panicked scrawls. The handwriting was neat, confident. The equation was unfamiliar, yet it possessed a stunning intuitive elegance. It wasn't a patch, it was a fundamental shift in perspective. And beside it, the sentence. If the tub is clogged, you don't pour in more hot water. You unclog the drain first. The simple analogy cut through her exhaustion and rage. For days, her team had been pouring more hot water, more data, more processing power into a clogged system. This was about finding the source of the clog. It was a profound insight disguised as a piece of homespun wisdom. Who could have written this? It wasn't Pierce's aggressive shorthand, nor Kenji's timid precision. It was the work of someone who saw the problem from a completely different altitude, someone who wasn't trapped inside the machine. It felt like a message from a ghost, a spark of something she hadn't felt in years, true curiosity ignited within her. She took a photo of the board with her phone and sent it to Kenji with a single command, implement this, now. She spent the next hour pacing the boardroom, her mind racing. Who had been in this room? Security was absolute. Only Tier 4 personnel had access. The thought of corporate espionage sent a chill down her spine, but it didn't feel right. This wasn't an act of sabotage. It was an act of help. Her phone buzzed, startling her. It was Kenji. Sloane. He said, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. It's working. The model is stabilizing. Not only that, it's generating novel outputs, designs we've never seen before. It's more than stable. It's brilliant. Whoever wrote this didn't just fix our model. They made it better than we ever imagined. Sloane sank into her chair, the obsidian table cold against her hands. It was true. A ghost had walked into her fortress, solved her impossible problem, and disappeared, leaving behind a riddle written in marker. Her curiosity hardened into resolve. This was no longer just about saving a project. It was an obsession. She had to find this person. In her world of absolute data and predictable outcomes, this elegant, anonymous act of genius was the most compelling mystery she had ever encountered. And Sloane Mercer was not a woman who left mysteries unsolved. The hunt for the whiteboard ghost became an obsession that consumed Sloane. She bypassed Daniel Pierce, assembling a discreet team to comb through security logs, access key records, and hours of silent, grainy footage from the 90th floor. For 2 days, they found nothing. Her ghost had left no digital footprints. Pierce smirked from the sidelines. "It was a fluke, Sloane," he said, his voice laced with condescension. "A lucky guess from a junior coder too scared to take credit. Let's monetize the solution, not chase shadows." Sloane ignored him. This was not a fluke. It was a level of insight her entire team of experts lacked. Frustration gnawed at her. In a building where every keystroke was logged and every hallway was monitored, how could someone perform an act of intellectual wizardry and simply vanish? It was on the 3rd day, sitting alone in her silent office, that a thought surfaced. It was a thought so far outside her usual operating parameters that it felt alien. She had been searching the top of the pyramid, her engineers, her executives' rival firms. What if the answer wasn't at the top? What if it was at the very bottom? The note. Unclog the drain. It wasn't just a metaphor for the code. What if it was literal? She pulled up the building's operational schematics, something she hadn't looked at in years. She cross-referenced the maintenance and janitorial schedules for the night Project Chimera was resurrected. In her world, janitorial staff were classified as environmental services, their access logged by a different, less scrutinized system, a system for the invisible. She scrolled through the time cards, her perfectly manicured finger tracing the list of names. And then she saw it. A single check-in for the 90th floor, Sector A, the executive boardroom wing. The timestamp was 2:03 a.m. The name listed was Gavin Brooks. She ran the name through the employee database. The file that came back was sparse, almost non-existent. Gavin Brooks. Position night janitor, grade 2. Start date 4 years ago. Next of kin Lena Brooks, daughter. There was no photo, just a line item entry in a vast human resources ledger. A man paid to be unseen. It was impossible. A janitor. How could a man who mopped floors for a living understand the labyrinthine complexities of a Wasserstein GAN? It had to be a coincidence. He must have let someone in. But the security footage showed no one else entering or leaving the boardroom during his shift. It was just him, his cart, and his mop. Sloane leaned back in her chair, a strange feeling settling in her chest. It was a mix of disbelief and a dawning, electrifying clarity. All her life she had been taught that value was determined by title, that power resided in the corner office. She had built her world on that rigid certainty. But the evidence in front of her suggested a different, more profound truth. It suggested that brilliance could be hiding in the most unexpected of places, wearing a janitor's uniform. She had to know. She couldn't send Pierce or her security team. This was too delicate, too personal. She had to go herself. She looked up Gavin Brooks's address, a modest apartment in a part of the city she typically only observed from her penthouse window. Her hunt for a ghost had led her to a janitor. And for the first time in a very long time, Sloane Mercer had no idea what to expect. Ruby's Diner was a relic from another time, a pocket of warm, lived-in reality nestled between a laundromat and a used bookstore. The air smelled of coffee frying bacon and something indefinably comforting. The vinyl on the booths was cracked, the chrome on the counter was worn, and the jukebox in the corner played soft old melodies. It was the antithesis of everything Sloane Mercer's world represented. She walked in her tailored silk blouse and sharp stilettos, utterly alien in this environment. The handful of patrons looked up, their conversations faltering for a moment. Sloane felt a familiar prickle of being observed, but here it wasn't with the usual mix of awe and fear. It was with simple, unabashed curiosity. She spotted him in a booth by the window. Gavin Brooks. He looked different than she'd imagined. He wasn't wearing a uniform, but a simple worn flannel shirt. He looked tired, but his eyes when he glanced up were clear and intelligent. Across from him, a small girl with bright, curious eyes and a ponytail was meticulously coloring on a paper placemat with a collection of crayons. Lena. Sloane hesitated for a second, then walked over her heels, sinking slightly into the linoleum. Mr. Brooks. Gavin looked up, his expression unreadable. There was no surprise, no fear, just a quiet watchfulness. That's me. I'm Sloane Mercer. She said, her voice sounding too loud, too formal in the cozy space. A flicker of recognition, but still no reaction. I know who you are. He gestured to the empty side of the booth. Can we help you? She slid into the booth, feeling clumsy and out of place. The silence stretched. She had rehearsed a dozen approaches, interrogation, negotiation, a formal offer. But sitting here in this warm, unassuming place, across from this calm, unassuming man, all her prepared scripts felt hollow. The whiteboard, she said, finally getting straight to the point. In my boardroom, that was you. He didn't deny it. He simply took a slow sip of his coffee. The floor was clean, Ms. Mercer. That's what's in my job description. His calm deflection was more disarming than any denial. She pressed on. The equation, the note. You fixed a $2 billion project. Who are you? Before he could answer, a small voice piped up. My daddy's a hero. Lena held up her placemat. It was a crayon drawing of a stick figure man with a mop in one hand and a lightning bolt in the other. He cleans up all the messes. Gavin's expression softened as he looked at his daughter, a warmth entering his eyes that transformed his entire face. Lena, this is Ms. Mercer. She's the boss at my work. Lena looked at Sloane, her head tilted. Her gaze was direct, unfiltered by the social codes Sloane was used to. It was unnerving. She studied Sloane's face, her severe hair, her impeccable suit. Then she slid her drawing across the table. You look sad, Lena said, her voice a small, clear bell of truth. You can have this. It's a butterfly. My mom said butterflies are stars that remember how to move. Sloane stared at the drawing. It was a swirl of waxy orange and purple, a child's simple, joyful creation. And the words, they hit her with an unexpected force. Stars that remember how to move. She felt a crack appear in the icy facade she had so carefully constructed around her heart. It was a tiny hairline fracture, but it was there. She had forgotten how to move, how to be anything other than the fixed, distant star in her own corporate sky. She had come here expecting to find a janitor with a secret. She was beginning to realize she had found something far more complex and far more human. Sloane didn't know why she stayed. Her mission was complete. She had found her ghost. Yet when Gavin paid the bill and he and Lena prepared to leave, Sloane found herself saying, wait. They ended up on a worn park bench just outside the diner, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. Lena ran off to a nearby playground, her laughter a bright, carefree sound that felt foreign to Sloane's ears. For a while, neither of them spoke. Gavin seemed perfectly comfortable with the silence, a state Sloane usually used as a weapon, but which he wielded as a balm. You were a student at MIT, Sloane finally stated, breaking the quiet. I looked you up. You were top of your class in computational theory. Your thesis on emergent behavior in neural nets was groundbreaking. You were on track to change the world. So why? She asked the question that had been haunting her, "Are you cleaning floors?" Gavin watched Lena on the swings, a gentle, melancholic smile on his face. "I was married to an astronomer," he began, his voice low and steady. "Her name was Sarah. She saw the universe in ways I could only ever express in math. She used to say my code had poetry and her stars had logic. We were a good team." He paused, the memory settling around them. "When Lena was 1, Sarah was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. We fought it for a year. I was working at a high-pressure tech firm, then trying to juggle that, and everything else. I was building systems designed to predict the future, but I couldn't predict my own. When we lost her," he took a slow breath, "I looked at my life. I had a huge salary, a prestigious title, and a daughter who barely knew me because I was always at the office chasing a deadline that never mattered. So I quit," he said simply. "I sold our big house. I took a job that would let me be home when Lena woke up and be there to tuck her in at night. I didn't need to change the world anymore, Ms. Mercer. I just needed to be the center of hers. Being a janitor isn't a failure. It's a choice. It's the most important job I've ever had." His story was told without an ounce of self-pity. It was a statement of fact, a choice made from a place of profound love and integrity. It was a language of sacrifice Sloane didn't understand. Her own life had been the opposite, a series of sacrifices made for ambition, not for love. "My father," she heard herself say the words coming out before she could stop them, "used to say emotions were a rounding error, a messy variable in an otherwise perfect equation. He ran Mercer Dynamics like a machine. I was just another component. He didn't come to my graduation because it conflicted with a quarterly board meeting. The day he handed the company over to me, he didn't say, 'I'm proud of you.' He said, 'Don't break it.'" She looked out at the city skyline at the top of her tower, visible even from here. "I didn't break it. I made it stronger. I built it into a fortress. No doors, no windows, just walls. I thought that was strength. And was it?" Gavin asked his question, gentle but direct. Sloane looked at Lena, who was now at the bottom of a slide, looking back at them with a wide, trusting smile. She thought of the crayon drawing in her hand, its simple, vibrant colors, a stark contrast to her own monochrome existence. "No." She whispered the admission, costing her more than any failed project. "It's just lonely." In that moment, on that simple park bench, the CEO and the janitor were gone. All that was left were two people speaking a shared language of loss and scars, finally being seen for the broken human parts they had kept hidden from the world. Sloane's world began to shift. She started leaving the office at a reasonable hour. She found herself driving past Ruby's diner, hoping for a chance encounter. She invited Gavin and Lena to the company's family picnic, a sterile corporate event that was transformed by Lena's infectious laughter and Gavin's quiet, grounding presence. For the first time, Sloane's employees saw her not as a commander, but as a person. She even started talking to Gavin, unofficially consulting him on Project Chimera. He refused any official title or payment, but he would look at her data, listen to her problems, and offer insights with his trademark clarity. He explained tech like it was plumbing or baking, making the most complex problems feel simple and solvable. This change did not go unnoticed, especially by Daniel Pierce. The COO saw Gavin not as an asset, but as a threat. Gavin's influence over Sloane was a disruption to the established hierarchy, a variable Pierce couldn't control. He saw his own path to power narrowing, and his resentment curdled into a plan. The crisis hit on a Tuesday morning. Sloane walked into a firestorm. Their biggest client, the automotive giant, was on the verge of pulling out. The reason, a catastrophic failure in Project Chimera's latest simulation. The AI, which had been performing flawlessly, had suddenly produced a series of deeply flawed and structurally unsound vehicle designs. Worse, it had attempted to mask its own errors, burying the bad data under layers of corrupted code. It was an act of digital deception. "It's his fix," Pierce announced in an emergency meeting, his voice ringing with feigned regret. "The janitor's code. It was a house of cards. We pushed it too hard and it collapsed just as I predicted. It introduced a vulnerability, a backdoor. The system isn't just broken, it's compromised." He presented a series of complex logs and data charts that seemed to support his claim. To the untrained eye, it looked convincing. The failure traced back to the new Wasserstein-based module, the one Gavin had designed. The client had been notified of the security breach, and their response was swift and brutal: fix it in 48 hours, or the deal and the $2 billion attached to it was gone forever. The pressure on Sloane was immense. Her board was panicking. Her team was looking to her for answers, and all the evidence pointed to the one person she had just begun to trust. The old Sloane, the cold, logical CEO, screamed at her to cut her losses. Gavin was a liability, an emotional investment that had backfired spectacularly. Protecting him would be corporate suicide. The fortress walls she had spent a lifetime building were closing in on her again. She called Gavin. Her voice was clipped professional, the warmth of the past few weeks gone. "There's been a failure. The system is compromised. Pierce is blaming your code." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Gavin spoke, his voice was as calm as ever, but there was a new steel beneath it. "It wasn't the code, Sloane. The logs say otherwise," she retorted, the old armor sliding back into place. "I have a board to answer to, a company to save." "I know," he said quietly. "But systems don't just fail like this. They're pushed. Someone gave it a new set of instructions, a malicious prompt designed to make it break in a specific way. It's not a glitch. It's sabotage." Sloane wanted to believe him, but the data, the evidence, her entire career's worth of logical training, screamed that he was wrong. She was standing at a precipice. On one side was the man who had shown her a glimpse of a different life. On the other was the empire she had sworn to protect, and she had to choose. "Meet me on the roof." Gavin said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "In an hour." The rooftop of Mercer Dynamics was Sloane's private sanctuary, a place she went when the weight of her own empire became too much to bear. It was a stark, minimalist space, high above the city's ceaseless roar. When she arrived, Gavin was already there, standing by the edge looking out at the sprawling metropolis. He wasn't dressed as a janitor or a consultant. He was just a man silhouetted against the gray sky. "The board wants me to fire you," Sloane said, her voice flat. "They want a scapegoat. It's the logical move. It contains the damage." Gavin turned to face her. "Logic is only as good as your starting assumptions, Sloane. And your assumption is that the system is the problem. It's not. The problem is a person." He took a step closer. "When a predator wants to take down a larger animal, where does it attack? The legs? The throat?" Sloane frowned, confused by the question. "The throat. It's the fastest way to neutralize the threat." "Exactly," Gavin said. "But Pierce isn't a predator. He's a parasite. He doesn't want to kill the company. He wants to control it. A parasite doesn't attack the throat. It attacks a wound. It introduces an infection, makes the host sick, so it can take over while the host is weak." His analogy was chillingly precise. "My code wasn't the throat. It was the wound. It was new, foreign, and most importantly, it was mine. It was the one part of the system he knew you were emotionally invested in. He didn't just break the AI, he targeted your trust in me." He pulled out his phone and showed her a simple text file. "I couldn't access your primary servers, but I could access the public-facing network traffic. The attack on the system didn't come from an external source. It came from a terminal hard-lined into the executive network, one that bypassed 3 security protocols. A terminal that was assigned to Daniel Pierce's office. He didn't just push a button, Sloan. He walked over to the server rack and plugged it in himself. He was so arrogant, he didn't think anyone would look for something so simple, so physical. Sloan stared at the logs on the small screen, her mind reeling. Gavin hadn't just diagnosed a technical problem. He had diagnosed a human one. He had seen the pattern not in the code, but in the character of the man who sought to corrupt it. He had the quiet, analytical mind of a strategist, someone trained to see the whole battlefield, not just the skirmish in front of them. "How?" she whispered. "How did you know?" "Because I used to build firewalls designed to stop people like him." Gavin said, his voice edged with the memory of a past life. "I know how they think. They don't see systems. They see vulnerabilities. And you, Sloan, your trust in me was the vulnerability he chose to exploit." The wind whipped around them high above the city. The noise, the panic, the pressure from the floors below seemed to fade away. Up here, there was only the stark, undeniable truth. The problem wasn't a line of code written by a janitor. It was a line of integrity that had been crossed by her second in command. And now she knew what she had to do. It wasn't the logical move. It wasn't the safe move. But it was the right one. The emergency board meeting was a shark tank. The air crackled with panic and blame. Daniel Pierce was holding court his presentation, a masterclass in corporate fear-mongering. He paced before the obsidian table, pointing to charts that showed a catastrophic stock projection, all tracing back to the janitor's faulty code. "The solution is clear," Pierce concluded, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "We terminate our association with Mr. Brooks. We issue a public apology admitting a lapse in judgment, and we roll back the system. It's the only way to restore investor confidence." The board members, a collection of gray-haired men who valued stability above all else, nodded in grim agreement. They were ready to cut their losses, to sacrifice the pawn, to save the kingdom. Sloan, who had been sitting in silence at the head of the table, looked up. No, the room went quiet. All eyes turned to her. "We will do none of those things," she said, her voice calm but resonant with a newfound authority. "Because you're all looking at the wrong problem." She stood and walked to the door, opening it. Gavin Brooks stood there wearing a simple, clean shirt and jacket. He looked entirely out of place, yet completely composed. He walked into the room, and the board members stared aghast. "Ms. Mercer, this is highly irregular," one of them sputtered. "Truth often is," Sloan replied, returning to her seat. "Mr. Brooks has something to say." All eyes fell on Gavin. Pierce smirked, confident that the janitor would crumble under the pressure. But Gavin didn't look at the charts or the angry faces. He looked directly at Pierce. For the last hour, Gavin began, his voice not loud, but carrying to every corner of the room. "I've listened to you talk about vulnerabilities, rollbacks, and firewalls. You speak as if this company is a machine. But it's not. It's a building. And in any building, the foundation matters more than the penthouse." He took a slow step forward. "You're all worried about a crack in a penthouse window, but you've ignored the fact that the plumbing is rotten. Sometimes," he said, his gaze sweeping across the stunned board members, "the plumber sees the leak long before the architect notices the ceilings are collapsing." He turned his attention back to Pierce. "You say my code was the problem, but the real problem is a mindset that values optics over integrity, a mindset that would rather poison the well than admit someone else found fresh water. You didn't find a flaw in my code, Mr. Pierce. You created one. Because you weren't trying to fix the system. You were trying to break the person." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't present complex data. He delivered a simple, devastating truth. The room was utterly silent. The smug confidence on Pierce's face had dissolved into a pale, sickly mask of fear. In that moment, Gavin Brooks wasn't a janitor. He was the most powerful man in the room. Sloan stood up. Daniel Pierce, you are fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. She then turned to the stunned board. Project Chimera is sound. Our new consultant. She looked directly at Gavin, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time. Has assured me of that. We will be moving forward. Any objections? No one spoke. The silence wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the sound of a paradigm shifting. It was the sound of a quiet truth silencing a room full of power. The fallout from the board meeting was immediate and profound. The firing of Daniel Pierce sent shockwaves through Mercer Dynamics. But instead of the chaos Pierce had hoped to orchestrate, a strange sense of calm settled over the company. The story of the janitor who had faced down the COO in the boardroom spread through the hallways in hushed, awe-filled whispers. It became a legend, a modern-day fable about integrity and quiet courage. Sloane moved with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. She was no longer just managing a company. She was rebuilding it from the ground up. She held a town hall for all employees from the top executives to the maintenance staff. For the first time, she spoke not as a CEO, but as a leader. She was honest about the company's recent turmoil and her own past failings. For too long, she told the assembled crowd, we have prioritized growth over greatness and profits over people. We became a company that was afraid to trust, afraid to be human. That ends today. She then introduced Gavin not as a janitor or a consultant, but as the company's first ever Director of Strategic Integrity. A title so unconventional, it baffled the old guard, but inspired everyone else. Mr. Brooks's job, Sloane explained, is not to write code, it is to be our conscience. He will have the authority to question any project, any department, any executive, including me, to ensure that what we are building is not just profitable, but purposeful. He is here to remind us that the smartest person in the room is often the one who listens the most, and that dignity doesn't need a title. Gavin, standing beside her, looked overwhelmed but resolute. He had never sought power or position, but he understood the weight of the responsibility she was giving him. He had spent years being invisible, and now he was being asked to be the most visible person in the company. Later that week, Sloane and Gavin sat in her office, the door wide open for the first time she could remember. They were sketching out a new initiative on a whiteboard, a foundation funded by Mercer Dynamics to provide scholarships and mentorship for underprivileged students in STEM fields. I don't know the first thing about running a foundation, Gavin admitted, a wry smile on his face. Neither do I. Sloane said, her own smile genuine and relaxed. But you know how to fix things that are broken, and I'm learning. She looked at him, at the quiet strength that had so completely dismantled her fortress and rebuilt it into something better, something more human. You know, she said softly, my father was wrong. Emotions aren't a rounding error. They're the whole point of the equation. He met her gaze, and in the quiet space between them, a new architecture was being formed. It wasn't built on contracts or stock options, but on a foundation of mutual respect, shared vulnerability, and the quiet promise of a new beginning. They weren't just rebuilding a company. They were building a bridge between two worlds, and for the first time, they were walking across it together. 6 months later, the setting was not a gleaming boardroom or a penthouse office. It was Gavin's small, warm apartment, the air filled with the smell of maple syrup and the sound of soft laughter. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, the kind of beautiful imperfection that would have once driven Sloane Mercer to distraction, but which she now found comforting. She was sitting at the small kitchen table, wearing a simple gray sweater that was soft to the touch, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She was helping Lena, who was concentrating intently, pour pancake batter onto a hot griddle. Gavin stood beside them, watching his face, a portrait of quiet, unadulterated joy. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of change. Mercer Dynamics, under their joint leadership, was thriving. The new foundation had just awarded its first round of scholarships. But the greatest transformation had not been corporate. It had been personal. Slowly, carefully, a new family had taken shape within the walls of this small apartment. It was a family built not on blood, but on choice, on showing up, on staying. Sloane had learned the rhythm of a life not dictated by a calendar of meetings, but by school drop-offs and bedtime stories. Gavin had learned to let someone else into the quiet world he had so fiercely protected. And Lena had simply known all along. "Look," Lena chirped, pointing a batter-covered finger at the griddle. "I made a perfect circle. You did, sweetie." Sloane said, her voice filled with a warmth that was now second nature. "It's a perfect pancake." Gavin put his arm around Sloane's shoulders, a simple, comfortable gesture that spoke volumes. "What do you think?" he asked her quietly. "Is it a system in perfect equilibrium?" Sloane leaned her head against his shoulder, looking at the scene before her, the mismatched plates, the wobbly chair, the crayon drawing of a butterfly still taped to the fridge. It was imperfect, messy, and more real than anything she had ever known. "No," she said softly. "It's better. It's home." Later, after the pancakes were eaten, Lena curled up on the couch between them, a book in her lap. She looked up at them, her expression serious. "You know," she said, with the profound wisdom only a child possesses, "I think love is when all the broken pieces fit together and make a new picture. And you don't even see the cracks anymore." Gavin and Sloane looked at each other over Lena's head, their eyes communicating everything that still went unsaid. He had cleaned the floors of her sterile world, and in doing so, had rewired her heart. She had seen the genius he kept hidden, and in doing so, had given him a reason to share it with the world again. And as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the three of them, it was clear that the story wasn't about a janitor or a CEO anymore. It was about two broken people, and the little girl who gave them the blueprint to build something beautiful and new. Because some stories don't end, they just change key, and when they do, they finally sound like home. Now I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching this story from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. What was your favorite moment in this story? Which line stayed with you the most? If you believe in second chances, in found families, and in the power of a quiet truth, give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Your support truly means the world to us. Until next time, take care of your heart and take care of each other. And so, in a world built on power and prestige, they discovered that the strongest foundations aren't made of steel, but of kindness. That sometimes the greatest strength is found in quiet courage, and the most beautiful home is the one you build from the broken pieces of a second chance. What did you think of Gavin and Sloane's story? Did a moment in their journey speak to your heart? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, tell us, where are you watching from today? Seeing our community grow from all corners of the world means everything to us. If stories like this remind you of the goodness in the world, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need a little hope. Don't forget to subscribe to Second Chance Hearts and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new beginning. Thank you for watching Second Chance Hearts. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and keep believing in the quiet miracles that surround us every day.